Kakadosh Boker Tov, Masechet Yevamot Daf Amud Aleph 31a1. We just finished off yesterday by answering that Kevin the Kamitzachta Chalitza, from the fact that you needed Chalitza, everybody knows that it is a Chumra Be'alma, which means that you're not permitting her to the shuk, to the marketplace, because of Tzarat Erva. So everyone's going to know that she cannot do Yibum. It's all going to be a Chumra Be'alma, because if the Kiddushin of the Erva was a good Kiddushin, so therefore she would have been permitted without Chalitza. For the fact that she has to do Chalitza, therefore everybody knows, right, that we know that it's a Chumra that we're doing over here. So ask the Gemara, and this is where we're starting today. If so, that even in a Safek Kiddushin Meikar Adin, we would put that the tzara is in the chazakah at the beginning, right? That she's permitted to do yibum. Nevertheless, the chachamim were machmir that she should not do yibum. So girushin nami litne. So too by girushin. The Tana of the Mishnah should have said that by a safek girushin, which means if you throw it to her and there's a safek whether it was closer to her or not closer to her, which means if she's divorced or not divorced. You should have said that she should need chalitza lechumra. Why? Because of the safek girushin of the erva. That means even though Karadin, we're going to put the tzara bechizkata rishona, that she was permitted to the marketplace. Because we were going to say that it was a good, meaning that the safek girushin, that it was not a girushin, because we placed her on the chazakah that she was still married beforehand, because the girushin was not a girushin, and therefore you should still say that she needs chalitza, not that she's tura legamre. Umeida yadid chumra balma, and then we know that it's all going to be a chumra. So therefore, if we know that it's going to be a chumra, we're not going to think that now there's going to be a problem coming out of it to do with yibum or things like that. So answers the Gemara, no. There's a problem. If you say that she has to do chalitza, automatically people think that there's a choice. If I say you have to do chalitza, so then you could do yibum. And then the yibum would be a problem. Because obviously you're not allowed to do yibum. Because it's sarat erva. You're over in isur karet. So therefore it's a problem. So says the Gemara, Hachanami mata omer choletzet mityabemet. So 1 second, by Safek Kiddushin, you have the, why is it only by Girushin? Which means, why is it only by divorce? Yeah, do you say such a concept, right? That if you say, if you say Chalitza, you would say also do Yibum. It's also by Kiddushin the exact same thing. There's no difference. Hachanami imata omer choletzet mityabemet. So says the Gemara, no, v'tityabem v'mekach klum, a chazaka kakaima. Says no. Here, right, to do with the case of the kiddushin, there's cheskat heter to the yabam. She's right now b'cheskat heter to the yabam. And minadim, there's no isur to do yibum, right? Chachamim meira chumra that you cannot do yibum and you have to do chalitza. But even if you would do yibum, there's no isur. Meaning, by the case of kiddushin, what's the entire problem? The entire problem is that maybe she did a kiddushin or didn't do a kiddushin to this woman that she was an erva, right? So now, in such a case, she has a chazakah kamay. What's the chazakah kamay? The chazakah beforehand is that she's still beheter. In the case of kiddushin, it's the exact opposite. She's v'yisur, and now you want to permit her. So there's a difference. So Eitvei Abaye comes and asks to Rabbi from the Mishnah. The Mishnah is later on, so Amul Bet. Nafal abayit alav al bat achi ven yodu eze mem met rishon. You have a case where a person, the house falls on a person, and it kills him and his niece. He's married to his niece, bat achi. Okay. Ve'en yadua eze mem met rishon. Now there's also another wife, and there's no children. Okay. So the person has another wife. Now we don't know who died first. So it says over here, why? Because if you're going to tell me the Bat Achiv died first, so then the other wife would need to do Yibum. If you're going to tell me, right, that he died first, so then again it's Sarat Erva. Sarat Erva, so then nobody has to do anything. So says the Gemara, Sarata, this is the Mishnah later on, Sarata choletzev lo mityabemet. She does Chalitza and not Yibum. So says the Gemara, Amai, why? So to here, to say, that she's permitted to the shuk because of the erva. Meaning right now, before the case, is she permitted to the shuk? Yes. Because if right now the husband would die without this that the house collapsed on top of them without this problem, right? What is the chazakah of this other wife? The chazakah of the other wife is that she goes to the shuk without anything. Why? Because she's a co-wife of the niece, and therefore, if the husband dies, the niece cannot go to her father, right? So therefore, since she can't go to her father, sarat erva, that's it. She's tura legamre. So now misafek, you want to come and you want to prohibit her. So al tasar misafek, don't prohibit her misafek, right? Just like you want to say by safek girushin. So now maybe you're going to say also, right? The rabbi said that she had to do chalitza only lechumra. So he says chumra de kulahu. It's going to be a chumra de kula again, a chumra which is coming to a kula. Why is it a chumra coming to a kula? He says, you know why? He says because shimata omer choletzet. If you're going to tell me that she does chalitza, she could do yibum. So answers the Gemara, no. Girushin deshchiche gazuru rabanan. The other case that we spoke about was girushin. Divorce is common, right? So therefore, the rabbis made a decree. How common it is it? It doesn't say, but meaning it's something common, right? Mapolet lo shchiche lo gazuru rabanan. Mapolet, that a building is going to collapse on someone, right? That is not common. That is something which is, they call it even, there's even a lot of insurances that they won't even cover it because I think it's called like, I forgot what it's called. It's like something of meaning that it's like it's like force majeure, that it's not like something normal. Meaning if it's something normal, so yeah, but if it's something which is like, like completely out of the norm, so then it's different halachot. So the same thing, he says, Amapolet, you tell him to do chalitza because it's not normal, it's something completely different. You understand? So therefore, in such a case, she does chalitza, not yibum, and we're not going to worry about anything. Okay? Fine. So says the Gemara, Inami, or if you want, you could answer, Girushin de kaime ervad kamuchach, de tzarata kamatzrachta la chalitza, right? By Girushin, that you already have, it's already nikar the erva, which is the tzarat erva. And therefore, her tzara, her co-wife, you need to make her that she should do chalitza. So Amni, so we said, Kamu berabbanan begita de gita me'alyahu. So then the rabbi said, you know what? Give her a get. Why? Because this get is a good get. And therefore, since the get is a good get, right? It's you're not going to come and say that she's going to be tzura from the chalitza, just like tzarat erva. Ve'atu liyabim letzara. So then you're going to say, so do yibum, right? Mapolet mi kamu berabbanan mapolet, which means like this. By get, people can make a mistake. You know what the mistake is? They could say, you know what, they started investigating. And after investigating, the rabbis realized that yes, that it was closer to him, closer to her, whichever one that it is. So now you could actually come and you could say, okay, fine, because the rabbis made that decision, so now, right, they're going to come and they're going to do yibum to the tzara because they realized whether she was already divorced or not divorced. So if you make the mistake and start saying do chalitza, that could cause a downfall, that could cause a mistake, then now maybe they're going to do yibum. But to do the mapolet, it's impossible to know who died first. How are you going to distinguish who died first? By pulse? By what? It's impossible. They cannot come and say, this one died first, the other one died first. They're never going to know. Right? They cannot know. It's impossible to know. So because of that, the rabbis did not make such a decree. Okay, so those are two different answers. Whether that divorce is common and mapolet is not common, mapolet is the building falling down on them is not common, or the girushin, they could find out be'emet what was the case and how the halacha is, whether she was divorced or not divorced, and then they will make a mistake and do yibum afterwards as well, not only chalitza, but by mapolet they'll never find out. Okay? So says the Gemara, girushin milotznan, says what, by girushin we didn't learn that such a safek does chalitza, but now we learned to Masechet Gitina in Chet Amud Aleph. Imagine right now this woman is sitting in Reshut Rabim, and now they threw her a get. Karov la megureshet. If it's closer to her, it's considered she's divorced. Karov lo, if it's closer to him, she's not divorced. Mechzal, what happens if it's half-half? Meaning it's bidyuk exactly between her and him. Megureshet, veno megureshet. She's divorced and not divorced. So says the Gemara, what does that mean exactly? She's divorced and not divorced. What are you talking about? So he says, the kohenhu asurale. Because what happens if the divorcee, the one that's getting divorced, he's a kohen. Now we know a kohen cannot get married to her again. So now it was exactly half-half. So says the Gemara, Migureshet v'no Migureshet. Now the guy's a Kohen. If it was not a divorce, so perfect, you take back his wife. But if it was a divorce, Kaddish, that's it. He's finished. So says the Gemara, the Irva, right? Or another Chumrah, he says, if she's an Irva, the tzara would need a chalitza. So that's the case of Migureshet v'no Migureshet. V'lo amrina. Now here we do not say that if you need chalitza, you would need yibum. So here there is a case of girushin, and here you do find by a case of girushin the concept of chalitza v'lo mityabemet. Now why? Right? Girushin is common. Girushin, it could come a mistake that afterwards they're going to do chalitza. So what's going on? So answers the Gemara. Ha'itmar Allah. We already said in this. Rabbi Rav Yosef, Rabbi Rav Yosef both said, Hacha b'shte kitei adin askinan. There are two different groups of witnesses. Two witnesses come and say it was closer to her. Two witnesses come and say it was closer to him. So here, since you have, right, the two against two, right, what happens is that since you have the two people which are testifying that it came closer to her, so it's a safek doraita, right? We cannot come and say to place the tzara and the chazaka against the edim and to permit it. But our Mishnah is bekatachat, is only with one group of witnesses. Okay, and therefore the two witnesses which are saying that it's closer to her. So double is fake the Rabbanan. So then it's a safek the Rabbanan only. Because mina Torah, we're going to put the tzara on chazkata, and sometimes the chachamim we're going to be machmid, right? That we're not going to place it on the chazaka and safek kiddushin. That even though she's becheskat heter to the avam, the rabbis were more stringent. Okay, but safek kiddushin, right? That it's actually going to be right worse. So therefore, he says, since there's Toraita, so we didn't want, because of, if you're going to say you have to do Chalitza, you have to do Yibum. So says the Gemara, why did you make such an anacha that our Mishnah is with one group of witnesses? Meaning, who's deciding now how many groups of witnesses are there? You're saying over there, two groups of witnesses, two against two. Here, there's only one group of witnesses. Whoever so told you that. Yeah? So the Gemara answer is very simple. Dunya de Kiddushin. What does that mean? We know, right, that just like Kiddushin is bekatachat, so too Girushin is bekatachat. What does that mean? Kiddushin, right, you always have two witnesses that come and say that we saw that this person got married at a certain date, right? And we were there edim, we were there witnesses. So in such a concept, in such a place, right, that's what we're saying over here, it's completely different, okay? So says the Gemara, also in Safek Kiddushin, you have to say it's bekatachat. There's one group of witnesses. So says the Gemara, the Kiddushin gufayhu. How do you know that Kiddushin is also talking about only one group of witnesses? Maybe there's two groups of witnesses. So answers the Gemara, if you're going to tell me that it's going to be two groups of witnesses, tityabem, then bekachlu, do yibum, there's no problem. Yeah, do yibum and there's no problem. So what happens now is we say like this. If we're talking about now two groups of witnesses, right? So why is she not allowed to do yibum? So do yibum. There's no problem. Why? We're going to put her on the chazakah that she's permitted to do to the avam. Why? Because since two witnesses are coming and saying that the irva was not married, so therefore why can't she do yibum? If she was not married to the irva, for sure she could do yibum. So answers the Gemara, no. Says, I don't understand you. There are two witnesses that are also coming and saying that was closer to her. So now you're going to tell me that she should do yibum and nothing's going to happen? What are you talking about? Right? So he says, V'tu, and furthermore, when you're talking about two different groups of witnesses, it's also Safek the Rabbanan. We're going to say, you have two against two. So put two against two, and then you have the woman on her chazakah. So therefore, since you put two against two, and then you put the woman on her chazakah, right? So therefore, that's what we're saying. We're only going to be machmim to suspect it in safek. So he says, just like the properties of barshatia. What was the properties of barshatia? Barshatia was a person that sometimes he was healthy, and sometimes he was crazy. It's like bipolar. It was something like, so what happened? He says the Barshatia Zaben Nichse. It once happened the Barshatia came and he sold, right, property. And Atu Beit Trei V'amne. So two people came and they said, Keshu Chalim Zabin. When did he sell it? And he was healthy. Right? V'atu Beit Trei V'amnu. And other people, two people came and they said, no, Keshu Shote Zabin. He sold it when he was a little bit cuckoo. right? The way of the sale, he was off. He wasn't there. So now what happens? You have 2 against 2. So Amar Ravashi comes and he says, you're going to put 2 against 2. Right? Lamed Aleph Amud Bet, 31b. And then what do you do? If you put 2 against 2, you cancel out 2 against 2. Now that you cancel out 2 against 2, what do? You put the land in the chazakah, barshatya. Why? Because what was the original chazakah? That it was always in his possession. So for since it's a safek, you put in the original possession. So you see from here that even in a case of trei of 2 against 2, that you have 2 groups of witnesses which are contradicting each other. What you do is you put them on the chazakah. So too in safek girushin, when you have 2 against 2, right? Because until here, what happened? She was sarat erva, right? She was sarat erva. Now what happens? After being in sarat erva, you want to permit her to do yibum because maybe there was a girushin. And if the girushin was good, so then yes, it's good. So it's not true. Maybe it's incorrect. So says the Gemara, Ela Amar Abaye, but rather Abaye comes and he says, Yagid alav reo. The Mishnah was very, very short. And therefore, whether we're talking about, right, the Yagid alav reo means that the friend will tell you exactly what's going on. Tana b'kiddushin, right, v'hodin legirushin. We are learning it only in the case of kiddushin, about safek karov lo, safek karov la, v'hodin legirushin. Tana b'girushin, right, v'hodin lekiddushin. And the same thing we learned in Girushin to do with Katav Yichtav Yado, and you don't have edim and things like that. And we learned it by Kiddushin, which means like this. Now we're actually retracting from the other thing. Before, we wanted to answer that there was going to be a difference between Kiddushin and Girushin. That's what we wanted to answer. There's a difference in halacha between Kiddushin and Girushin. Now we're answering Be'emet, it's the exact same thing. The exact same thing. So now 1 second. So then why didn't we mention it then in the case of Girushin? It says Yagid alav reo. I'm going to mention it in one case, and the friend is going to, now you're going to learn from its friend what's halacha in another case. So for you're right, by the kiddushin we went and we learned that it was going to be, right, whether it's going to be karov lo, karov la, he threw her kiddushin and I have a safek, whether it was going to be closer to him or closer to her, the same thing over here. I've got a safek by the girushin, the exact same case, which means you cannot start asking why by girushin we didn't bring down the case. Yagid alav reo. The kiddushin is going to teach you for the girushin. By girushin it was also written other cases which was not written by kiddushin. You're right, girushin is going to learn to kiddushin, which means that each one learns from each other, right? Even though it wasn't written. Meaning in the Mishnah we brought down kiddushin, but by kiddushin we mentioned certain halachot, and by girushin we mentioned certain halachot. Says the Gemara, they both apply to each one. They both are equal. Okay? Fine. Amale Rava comes and he says, Iyagid alav reo, mai zehu dikatani. If you're going to tell me there's a concept called Yagid alav reo, that its friend is going to teach it for it, so what do we say? Zeu safek girushin. This is a safek girushin. Right? What does that mean? Ela amar Rava, but rather Rava says, Kol sheyesh bekiddushin yesh begirushin. Anything which is in kiddushin applies to girushin. Right? We're retracting. Again, one more time. Anything that applies to kiddushin also applies to girushin. However, though, yesh begirushin, but sometimes there are things which are in kiddushin which do not apply to kiddushin. Okay, so safek karov lo, safek karov la, which is brought down in the Mishnah, which is there's a doubt whether the kiddushin was closer to him or closer to her. Hu adim b'girushin. Right, the exact same halacha applies to girushin. That if there was a safek in the girushin because he threw the get, it was a safek closer to her because it's also the same thing. Right, that's bad, and that's why we said zeu safek kiddushin. However, though, he comes and he says, "V'zeu the girushin lav dafka," but the zeu of the girushin is lav dafka, meaning it's not specifically like we brought down. Ela mishum the tana zeu b'kiddushin. But since we learned zeu safek in the kiddushin, we learned zeu safek b'girushin, even though by zeu does not come to exclude anything. Tana zeu, right? Nami zeu b'kiddushin. The zeu kiddushin lemiut mai, lemiut zman the lekab kiddushin. So therefore, the zeu by the kiddushin, what is it coming to exclude? Is coming to exclude a case of safek kiddushin, which you do not have in kiddushin, right? Why? The kiddushin does not have a tarikh; it's still going to be kosher, right? And the woman could get married with it. Which means if you have a ketubah or a shtar kiddushin, right, and there it's written without a date, it's still kosher. Right? What does it mean it's still kosher? You could get married with it. There's no problem. But by a get, it's not. So says the Gemara, why is it that way? Why is it that you only made a takana that you need zman, beget, and not a kiddushin? Why? So he says, Hani chalamandamar, that's good according to the mandamar, mishum peri, because of perot, which means the reasoning of the takana, right? The reason of the institution of writing the zman in the get was because of perot, which means when do we know when is the husband allowed to eat the fruits from nisemelu? Which means when a woman gets married, right? So therefore, what happens is that she brings in property, right? So let's say she brought in property. Now it makes, nowadays we don't speak about fruit anymore, but let's say it makes rent. So that rent now goes to the husband. It's called nichsemelu, that she brought in, goes to the husband. When she gets divorced, he has to give her back to her. So now why do you need zman, right? Forget, right? Very simple. Maybe you got divorced and now he wants to continue eating the rent, right? Or eating the fruits. So what happens? They instituted, you needed the zman in order that we know from now onwards, that's it. You're not allowed to touch anymore, whether it's going to be the fruits or the rent. Okay? Now he says, but that's not going to be in every single case because arusa let lepeire. To do with an arusa, which means only kiddushin and not nisuin, right? There's no fruits yet. There's nothing yet. So therefore, they didn't institute, right? During the kiddushin, they didn't institute a zman because it doesn't matter right now, right? An arusa, what is the shtar? The shtar is for kiddushin. Kiddushin is erusin. Erusin is before nisuin. In such a case, right? It doesn't help. Why doesn't it help? Because I don't care, right? Because you don't get the fruits until after marriage. So that's why we didn't need a zman. When was the erusin? Because erusin is no perot. But lemandam mishum batachoto. There's another reason. What's the other reason? Batachoto. What happens if a person is married to his niece? Bat, right? Achoto, right? The niece of the sister, right? So now what happens is that she comes and she does infidelity. She comes and she cheats on her husband. So now what happens? Now, obviously, by nature, her husband is going to be very upset. He wouldn't care if they're going to kill her, right? Why? A woman cheats on her husband. He wouldn't care. Let her get killed. But it's batachoto. At the end of the day, it's his niece also. So he's, he feels for his sister. And therefore he says, you know what? I know what I'm going to do, right? Fine. He has to divorce everything that you want 100%. What's he going to do? He's going to write her a get. And he's not going to write time. And then he's going to say, listen, the truth is when she just went and she went with this guy, she was already divorced. Look, she has a get. Now, you don't have zman. So since you don't have zman, you don't have a time written on the get, you could do that. So it's shema yechape al bat achoto, which means that maybe she's going to have mercy on his niece. So says the Gemara, mishum diika, right now, 1 second. So now because of that, they only instituted the get, that there should be time in the get, and not on kiddushin. So 2 reasons. Shema yechape al bat achoto and perot. Okay, 2 different reasons. So says the Gemara, answers the Gemara, mishum diika de mekadesh akaspa, diika de mekadesh b'shtara. So lo tukun rabanan zeman. He says no. He says there's another concept. You know why by kiddushin there's not going to be any zman? Very simple. Because there's some people that they get married with money, and some people that get married with a shtar. So because of that, how do you get married with money in a time? Well, you're going to write on the dollar bills, right? Right? You're not going to do that. So therefore, that's why they didn't institute time in kiddushin. So Amale Ravacha Bered Rav Yosef Ravashi. Says, what about avadim? Avadim, if a person wants to acquire an Evet Kanani, some people acquire him with money, and some people acquire him with a shtar. And the rabbis did institute a zman. So, right, they did institute that you have to write the time and date, right? Not the time, but the date. So, therefore, according to that, you should also do it here. So, answers the Gemara, no. Hatam ruba b'shtara, hacharuba b'kaspa. Over there, to do the Evet Kanani, the majority of the people, they acquire Evet Kananis with documents. So therefore, there, they instituted time, right? They instituted you have to put a date. Here, the majority of people get married with kesef. The majority of people get married with kesef kiddushin. So because of that, right, it's completely different halachot. Ibaitema of you can answer another answer. Mishum de lo efsha, which means even if there would have been a case of batachoto, you couldn't have helped yourself. Why? It wouldn't have helped. What's he going to do? If he's going to put the shtar, right, of kiddushin by her, right? So then we're going to suspect machtale that she could come and she could still erase the zman. Meaning, even if you're going to put in the ketubah or in the shtar kiddushin here we're talking about, if you're going to put a zman and you're going to keep it by her, whenever she wants, she could erase the date. Yes, she could erase it. And she could say, what are you talking about? Right? I wasn't married at the time of the znut. Lincha gabe didei, if you're going to put it by him, so then again, maybe it's batachoto, and he's going to have mercy on his sister, and he's going to change the date, or he's going to do things. Lincha gabe edim, if you're going to put it by witnesses, right? If they remember, let to lisod, so then they could come and they could testify. But if they don't remember, they're going to look at the document, and then they're going to come and testify. Rahmana says, which means like this: testimony has to be through their mouth. It cannot be through written something down, right? So therefore, right now, if let's say we're two witnesses, and we remember that this guy got married on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, perfect, no problem. They could come to the Bedin and they could testify they got married on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But what happens now if we forgot? I don't remember if it was Aleph, if it was Lamed, if it was Bet, if it was, I don't remember exactly. What do? Look at the document and they say, in the document it says Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And now they come to the Bedin and they testify. It's not a good testimony because that's mipihem velo mipik tavam. They have to testify from their mouth and not from that which they saw, which is something written. So because of that, right, we have a problem with zman by kiddushin. If you're going to leave it by her, she's going to erase it. You're going to leave it by him, maybe it's batachoto, again he'll erase it. If you're going to leave it by a dean, maybe they're going to use it afterwards to check the documentation to see when be'emet did it occur. And then when they're going to come to testify, they're not going to testify what they according to their memory. They're going to testify according to what's written. So says the Gemara, say the exact same thing by Girushin, which means, why do you have to write the Zman? It will never help. It says no. There the get is saving her from the ownership of Znut, to say that she's actually divorced. And therefore you could actually leave the get by her. And we're not going to suspect that she's going to erase the time. But here, the document is actually doing for detriment. It's actually negative for her. So therefore, that's what we're saying. It's completely different thing. So since a shtar kiddushin doesn't help by writing the zman, they didn't actually institute to write by zman, by shtar kiddushin, but by gitin, they did. Says the Mishnah. Lamed Aleph Amud Bet, Mishnah on the bottom. Shlosha achim nesuin shalosh nochriot umet echamen. You got three brothers married to three women which are not sisters, three strangers. Okay, and one of them died without children. Now the wife fell in front of the other two. So the other one came and he did ma'amad. Remember, ma'amad is kiddushin because of vishtar. Vamet, right? And then this guy dies, right? So he comes and he says, Hare elu cholsot velo mityavmot. They do chalitza and not ibum. Okay? Shneimar, but it says in the pasuk, umet achamehem yevamei yavo alea. She'alea zikat yavam echad velo she'alea zikat shnei yavamim. Here she has zikat from two men, not from one. Okay? So that's the Tanakama, which means like this. One more time. You have here, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Okay, they each got married to three women which are not sisters. Each one a completely different women. Okay, now Reuven dies without children. That's Aleph. That's why he died first, without children. Okay, Shimon comes and he does ma'amar to Sarah. He didn't do a marriage. He did ma'amar. Okay, to Sarah. Okay, now Shimon dies without children. That's Bet. So now Shimon dies. His wife Miriam plus Sarah, which is Baalat ma'amar, now fall in front of Levi. They do chalitza no yibum. Why? The zikah of Sarah now comes because of two brothers, because of Reuven and Shimon. Because since it was only done ma'amad, right, and it wasn't done a true marriage, so therefore, right, this woman Sarah, she's coming mikoach Reuven and she's coming mikoach Shimon. Because again, she had to do yibum because of Reuven. There was no yibum done, there was only ma'amad. And she's coming mikoach Shimon because of the ma'amad. So she's coming mishte zikot, meaning she's coming from two houses to get married to Levi. So because of that, they do chalitza and not yibum. Rabbi Shimon says he could do yibum to whichever one he wants. Why? Because the ma'amar that Shimon does, right, is koneh. So then he says, if the ma'amar of Shimon is acquired, so now she's the wife of Shimon. And if the ma'amar of Shimon does not acquire, so then she's still the wife of Reuven. So Mimanav Shach, Sarah comes from Reuven, and Miriam comes from Shimon. If the ma'amar was good, so now Sarah and Miriam come from Shimon. So Shitat Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah is do yibum to whichever one that you want. According to Tanakama, chalitza to both of them. Okay? So Rabbi Shimon just going to read inside. Rabbi Shimon Omer, miyabem le'ezu shiyitzeh, vecholetz lashniya. You do yibum to whichever one that you want, and you do chalitza to the other woman. Says the Gemara, right? The easy kachne yevamim doraita chalitza nami lo tubai. Says 1 second. Even if you're going to tell me that a woman has a zikah from 2 yavams, she's ptura mina yibum completely mina Torah, and therefore chalitza nami lo tubai. If you're going to tell me that she's coming from 2 different things, so therefore 1 second. So why bichlal do you need even to do chalitza? She shouldn't do chalitza then. Yeah, she shouldn't do chalitza, right? Why? Because you don't have to do anything. Why do we require chalitza? And so the Gemara, midrabanan, you have to do chalitza. Okay, ugzera, and it's a gzera. Shema yomru shtei yevamot about mibayit echad mit yevamot. Because maybe you're going to say that if you have 2 yevamot coming from one house, maybe they both do yibum. Because since ma'amar is koneh midrabanan, it looks at least that there's 2 yevamot falling from the same thing. So now if he's going to come and he's going to do yibum to whichever one, they're going to say, so they can both do yibum. Meaning you have a person that he dies with 2 wives. We would think, you know what? Whichever one, both of them could do yibum. One to one brother, one to other brother, no problem. And it's not true. It's only one of them could do it. So because of this gezerah, we're going to come and say, midrabanan, they have to do chalitza and not yibum. So ask the Gemara, uniyabem lechad v'nichlol tzechad. Fine. So do yibum to one and chalitza to the other one. So answers the Gemara, gezerah shama yomru b'ayit echad miksato banui, right? Miksato chalutz, right? So he says, no, you know why? There's a gezerah that maybe we're going to say that if you have one house, the miksato banui, which means 2 yevamot which are coming from one house, one of them is yabemet, one of them chalitza, and that's what halacha. Only one of them does, or they're either yibum or chalitza, and the other one is ptura legamre. So because of that, we make this decree. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, we are going to continue.